Right, another expose. Two, in fact. A US spy master. This is some of the stupidity that goes on. Inadvertently helped the Nazis develop one of the most effective disinformation campaigns of the Second World War by spreading rumours about Hitler's plan for a Where Eagles Dare style Alpine redoubt. According to an historian with access to classified US military records. Now, the myth that the Nazis were amassing weapons and crack units of 100,000 fanatical soldiers in the spring of 1945 for their last stand in the Austro-Bavarian Alps was without any basis in fact, but had a powerful hold on the imagination of Britain and American military leaders who feared it could prolong the war for years. Did you pick up that line in there? Wonder how many did. Isn't it strange? The same figure of 100,000 troops amassed is now the pretext for another war. It is not a coincidence. Now, Thomas Bogart, a German historian at the US Army of Military History in Washington, D.C., argues in a new book that the myth of an Alpine Nazi fortress was not a crucial factor behind American forces abandoning the race to Berlin in favour of a southward push, but was one that the US spycraft had a hand in making. Indeed. And the Nazi leadership first got wind of Allied fears of a mountaintop last stand in 1944 after the SS's intelligence service intercepted a cable sent from the US Embassy in Bern, Switzerland. Yet again, more evidence of non-neutrality. But remember, the head of the CIA is in Switzerland. And whilst this was pre-CIA of America, this next passage will confirm their involvement. As Bogart shows in Covert Legions, US Army Intelligence in Germany, 1944 to 1949, the message had most likely been sent by Allen Dulles, who later was the head of the CIA during the Bay of Pigs invasion fiasco, but at the time the Bern station chief was at the Office of Strategic Services, OSS. And British intelligence had discovered that the special cipher used to secure Dulles's communications had been compromised, but the American spymaster continued to ignore their warnings, driving one irate British agent to despair. And Dulles, who went on to be the first civilian director of the CIA, he wasn't civilian by any means, who is also the longest serving director to date, who oversaw the Iranian coup of 1953, the Guatemalan coup of 1954, who oversaw Project MKUltra, the CIA's mind control program, and who was famously fired by John F. Kennedy, ostensibly for the Bay of Pigs invasion. Nope. Faction fighting. But the British agent said, "Could you report to the fool Dulles, who knows his code was compromised? If he has used that code to report meetings with anyone, the Germans probably identified persons concerned and used them for stuffing disinformation." And the agent vented to his station chief, "He swallows too easily," he added. And as the British had feared, Goebbels propaganda ministry would spend the following months building up the myth of a German defence effort in Austria and Bavaria via disinformation and media reports, hoping a sidetracked US military leadership could be drawn into a separate peace talks or even an alliance against the Soviets. Now, Dulles was said to be a very capable case officer who excelled at working with human sources, but when it came to signals intelligence, he was indeed highly negligent, Bogart said. And as Covert Legion shows, Allied forces were extremely susceptible to disinformation campaigns in the final stages of the war, with Field Marshal Montgomery arrested at one point as an imposter by American guards, following a rumour that the Germans were planning to impersonate the British commander. And what this shows is how easily the Americans are duped because of preconceived ideas and also brainwashing techniques. And by Americans, I meant the military and agency people. And the problem is they're too busy running around screaming, the Russians are coming, and how bad the Russians are. And yet all of it, or certainly most of it, was due to a few half-wits with badges of dishonour. You know, the American military and the agency top brass are riddled with fear programs. None of them have took the time to analyse or address. Now, after the end of the war, Nazis setting themselves up on snowy mountaintops became a staple of swashbuckling war movies, such as the 1968 Where Eagles Dare, starring Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood. However, some Allied intelligence reports explicitly cited the Alpine Redoubt theory as an argument for an Allied push into southern Germany in 1945. Now, Bogart rejects the idea that it played a crucial part in shaping the Second World War endgame and setting the ground for Cold War tensions with the Soviet Union, as Winston Churchill, Rothschild, later confirmed. But the US decision, listen closely to this, the US decision to not back a British plan for a pencil-like thrust to Berlin likely owed more to the fact that the Red Army, Red is not Russian by the way, it's Zionist, was already within 20 miles of the German capital, while Anglo-American forces were still 300 miles away, he said, and a deal to divide up the city had already been agreed. A deal to divide up the city was already agreed during the war. How nice of them. Of course, the next step was 250,000 flights between America and Germany to set up a new shop for Reich 4. And the author said, my impression is that the US command ultimately didn't really believe in the Alpine Redoubt myth, but may have kept it alive to persuade the British of their overriding strategy. Their overriding strategy. Americans in war don't have strategy. It is just shoot or bomb everything that moves, whether hostile or friendly, as we have found out. An American military having strategy is about as likely as them having common sense. And I'm sorry if that bothers some, but it's true. Next piece. What is green? And you ask that question and people will say, what are you referring to? And green, like many other words of the English language, has double or even triple meanings or multiple meanings, all designed to confuse And so then the context then becomes all important. Because without the context, what is green garners too many questions in return. Is green to do with gardening, envy, environmentalism, the colour, camouflage, or a programme? And here is the many connotations of green, and maybe that colour will not appear the same after this. And yes, Rochelle, I'm about to ruin something else. Did you know there is no green pigment in green eyes? Like the colour of blue eyes. It's an optical illusion. Its appearance is caused by the combination of an amber or light brown pigmentation of the stroma, given by a low or moderate concentration of melanin, with the blue tone imparted by the Rayleigh scattering of the reflected light. And nobody is brought into the world with green eyes. An infant has one of two eye hues, dark or blue. Now, following birth, cells called melanocytes start to discharge melanin and the earthly coloured shade in the child's irises. And these beginnings happening since melanocytes respond to light over time. Now, green eyes are most common in Northern and Central Europe. They can also be found in Southern Europe, West Asia, Central Asia, and South Asia. In Iceland, 89% of women and 87% of men have either blue or green, which is not the royal colour, eye colour. And a study of Icelandic and Dutch adults found green eyes to be much more prevalent in women than in men. And among European Americans, green eyes are most common amongst those of recent Celtic and Germanic ancestry, about 16%. Now, animals typically use the colour green as camouflage, blending in with the chlorophyll green of the surrounding environment. Most fish, reptiles, amphibians, and birds appear green because of a reflection of blue light coming through an overlayer of yellow pigment. And the perception of colour can also be affected by the surrounding environment. Now, in ancient Egypt, green was the symbol of regeneration and rebirth, and of the crops made possible by the annual flooding of the Nile. Paintings on the walls of tombs or on papyrus. Egyptian artists used finely ground malachite, mined in the West Sinai and the Eastern Desert, and a paint box with malachite pigment was found inside the tomb of King Tut, with the Ankh of Amun. Not Tutankhamun. Tut with the Ankh of Amun. And they also use less expensive green earth pigment or mixed yellow ochre and blue azurite. Azurite? I wonder why they named a colour after a race of beings that was higher than themselves. Now, to dye fabrics green, they first coloured them yellow with dye made from saffron and then soaked them in blue dye from the roots of the woad plant. And for the ancient Egyptians, green had very positive associations. The hieroglyph for green represented a growing papyrus sprout, showing the close connections between green, vegetation, vigour and growth. But green is an illusion. And so why was green also important to them? In wall paintings, the ruler of the underworld, Osiris, was typically portrayed with a green face, because green was the symbol of good health and rebirth. The underworld. And palettes of green facial makeup made with malachite were found in many tombs. And it was worn by both the living and the dead, particularly around the eyes of Ra, to protect them from evil. And tombs also often contain small green amulets in the shape of scarab beetles made of malachite, which would protect and give vigour to the deceased. Protect the dead, really. Of course, scarab beetles were more of the Egyptian symbolism, remember? And they said it also symbolised the sea, which was called the very green. Except the sea is not green either. And in ancient Greece, green and blue were sometimes considered the same colour, and the same word sometimes described the colour of the sea and the colour of trees. And the philosopher Democritus described two different greens, chloron, or pale green, and prasenon, or leek green. Aristotle considered that green was located midway between black, symbolising the earth, and white, symbolising water. Well, he was wrong then, wasn't he? Because their intentions were black, and quite how white is symbolising water is beyond me. But there you go. However, green was not counted among the four classic colours of Greek painting. It was red, yellow, black and white, and is rarely found in Greek art. Is it a coincidence that those four colours represented the four races here? Now, the Romans had a greater appreciation for the colour green. It was the colour of Venus. Well, I never. The goddess of gardens, vegetables and vineyards. And the Romans made a fine green earth pigment that was widely used in the wall paintings of Pompeii, Herculaneum, Lyon, Vaison-la-Romaine and other Roman cities. They also used the pigment verdigris, made by soaking copper plates in fermenting wine. But by the 2nd century AD, the Romans were using green in paintings, mosaics and glass, and there were 10 different words in Latin for varieties of green. And in the Middle Ages and Renaissance, the colour of clothing showed a person's social rank and profession. Red could only be worn by the nobility, brown and grey by peasants, and green by merchants, bankers and the gentry and their families. The Mona Lisa wears green in her portrait, as does the bride in the Arnolfini portrait by Jan van Eyck. Now, in legends, folktales and films, fairies, dragons, monsters and the devil are often shown in green. In the Middle Ages, the devil was usually shown as either red, black or green. Dragons were usually green because they had the heads, claws and tails of reptiles, which are green. And modern Chinese dragons, they say, are also often green, but unlike European dragons, they are benevolent. They're not. And Chinese dragons traditionally symbolise potent and auspicious powers, particularly control over water, rainfall, hurricane and floods. And so they were like a modern day harp arrangement then. Just saying. And the dragon is also said to be a symbol of power, strength and good luck. The Emperor of China usually used the dragon as a symbol of his imperial power and strength. No, it was indicative who he operated for. The dragon dance is a popular feature of Chinese festivals also, and in Irish and English folklore, the colour green sometimes was associated with witchcraft and with fairies and spirits. Well, I never. And a type of Irish fairy known as a leprechaun was commonly portrayed wearing a green suit, though before the 20th century he was usually described as wearing a red suit. Just like Santa. In theatre and film, green is often connected with monsters and the inhuman, and the earliest films of Frankenstein were in black and white, but the poster for the 1935 version, The Bride of Frankenstein, I didn't realise Pelosi was that old. The monster had a green face. And actor Bela Lugosi wore green-hued makeup for the role of Dracula in the 1927-28 Broadway stage production. And like other common colours, green has several completely opposite associations. And while it is the colour most associated by Europeans and Americans with good health, it is also the colour most often associated with toxicity and poison. Oops. A classic medical-based inversion then. Rather than the cure, they create more sickness to add more poisons and collect more shekels. One ponders, are shekels green? But according to Jewish law, whenever a census of the Jewish people was to be conducted, every person that was counted was required to pay the half shekel for his atonement. Well, I never. A tax on their people was then imposed on all of us, and now, of course, its new symbol is Nu, N-U. And yet more fake Egyptian god bullshit. But there was a solid foundation for this association in the 19th century. Several popular paints and pigments, notably verdigris, vert de Schweinfurt and vert de Paris, were highly toxic, containing copper or arsenic. And the intoxicating drink absinthe was known as the Green Fairy. You see, alcohol again, alcohol. They call it spirits for a reason. A green tinge in the skin is sometimes associated with nausea and sickness and MeWe gifs. And the expression green at the gills means appearing sick. And the colour, when combined with gold, is sometimes seen as representing the fading of youth. And in some Far East cultures, the colour green is used as a symbol of sickness or nausea as well. Green in Europe and the United States is sometimes associated with status and prosperity, and the colour of the cloth in royal counting houses from the late 14th century, later the colour of the cloth of gambling tables, was green. The benches in the House of Commons in the United Kingdom, where the landed gentry sit, or the lords, the psychopaths in other words, are also coloured green. The United States green was connected with the dollar bill since 1861, and the reverse side of the dollar bill has been green. Now, green, it said, was originally chosen because it deterred counterfeiters who tried to use early camera equipment to duplicate banknotes. And also, since the banknotes were thin, the green on the back did not show through and muddle the pictures on the front of the banknote. But green continues to be used because the public now associates it with a strong and stable currency, not anymore it isn't. Yet more of the illusion game. Of course, the US issued greenback in what turned out to be a demo run for the virtual implementing of a future program. Because greenbacks were emergency paper currency issued by the United States during the American Civil War that were printed in green on the back. And they were in two forms: demand notes issued in 1861-62 and the United States notes, both of them notes, which means debt, issued in 1862 through 1865. A form of fiat money, and the notes were legal tender for most purposes and carried varying promises of eventual payment in coin. But they were not backed by the existing gold or silver reserves. Green is also considered to be the median colour between light and obscurity, just like the media's use of the green screen then. And one of the more notable uses of this meaning is found in The Wizard of Oz, the Emerald City. And this story is a place where everyone wears tinted glasses that make everything appear green. And according to the populist interpretation of the story, the city's colour is used by the author L. Frank Baum to illustrate the financial system of America in his day, as he lived in a time when America was debating the use of paper money versus gold. The Emerald City, of course, brings up the Emerald Tablets, which brings in Hermes and Thoth, and also Quetzalcoatl. Now, green has played a dominant role in religion. Green is the traditional colour of Islam, which means hidden Isis. And according to tradition, the robe and banner of Muhammad were green, and according to the Quran, those fortunate enough to live in paradise wear green silk robes with their 72 virgins. No. Muhammad is quoted in a hadith as saying that water, greenery, and a beautiful face were three universally good things. Al-Qidr, known as the Green One, was an important Quranic figure who was said to have met and travelled with Moses. And he was given that name because of his role as a diplomat and negotiator, or perhaps that was the colour of his skin. Just saying. Roman Catholic, a more traditional Protestant clergy, wear green vestments at liturgical celebrations during what is called ordinary time. In the Eastern Catholic Church, green is the colour of Pentecost. Green is one of the Christmas colours as well, possibly dating back to pre-Christian times when evergreens were worshipped for their ability to maintain their colour through the winter season. Romans used green holly and evergreen as decorations for their winter solstice celebration called Saturnalia, which eventually evolved into a Christmas celebration. Oops. In Ireland and Scotland, especially, green is used to represent Catholics, while orange is used to represent Protestants. Yes, House of Orange. And it's also shown on the national flag of Ireland. In paganism, green represents abundance, growth, wealth, renewal and balance. Well, we'll ignore them. In magical, with a CK, practices, green is often used to bring money and luck. The dark seducement again. And one figure who shares parallels with the famous deities is the Green Man. Having a green thumb, American English, or green fingers, British English, to be passionate about or talented at gardening, and the expression was popularised beginning in 1925 by a BBC gardening programme. Other green terms brings in greenhorn, someone who is inexperienced. Green-eyed monster refers to jealousy. Green male, a term used in finance and corporate takeovers, and it refers to the practice of a company paying a high price to buy back shares of its own stock to prevent an unfriendly takeover by another company or businessman. And that originated in the 1980s on Wall Street and originates from the green of dollars. No surprise there then, financial skullduggery. A green room, a room at a theatre where actors rest when not on stage, or a room at a television studio where guests await before going on camera, only to then go into a green screen room. And it originated in the late 17th century from a room of that colour at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane in London. Greenwashing. Environmental activists sometimes use this term to describe the advertising of a company which promotes its positive environmental practices to cover up its environmental destruction. Going green, an expression commonly used to refer to preserving the natural environment and participating in activities such as recycling materials and the colour of environmentalism since 1971. Of course, environmentalism means in green mental. Green around the gills, a description of a person who looks physically ill. Looking green, a description of a person who looks revolted or repulsed. Green cheese, originally was that which is new or fresh. Late 14th century, and later with reference to colouring, was used for the story told to children that the moon is made of cheese. Stilton or Cheshire. All that mould stuff is probably more indicative. Green light, in figurative sense of permission, is from 1937, and green and red as signals on railways first attested in 1883 as nighttime substitutes for semaphore flags. The Green Beret, originally British Commando, is from 1949. And then we have the curious country called Greenland. Land of the Greens, perhaps. And yet it is almost entirely covered in ice, whilst the next island is entirely green and yet is called Iceland. Omicron is the abyss between the pillars seen in the Babylon, the gate or door of On, O-N. In Egyptian religion, On is the Heliopolis city of the sun, and Osiris the green one. Thus Omicron is the pale green horse of death. Osiris is the green one, a colour-coded programme of Dr. Green or Mengele proportions, or is the green one the Matrix? I will add one more green to finish this piece off, the green pass or passport, so you can enter and pass the port. Yet more water references. Religion, environmentalism, money programs, royals and off-world entities is enough to put anyone off of that colour. And perhaps I've ruined that as well now, or maybe there is a green-related piece in a future epic-style show that overrides it all.